Good morning. It's good to be back. It's really good to be back and see that all of you are still here. Now, all things being equal, it was actually kind of a difficult week. It was a difficult week for a variety of reasons. One is I had a week kind of sandwiched between the glory of a pilgrimage with many of our youth and a week at camp that starts this afternoon. And there was this great musical going on this week, which meant there was a lot of extra things going on as well, which all spells a lot of togetherness. Which, don't get me wrong, is a good thing, but is challenging when you at least recharge in part in solitude. So community has its blessings and its challenges, right? Yeah. And then it was additionally a difficult week as we processed the events that happened in Orlando that weigh heavy in the air and heavy on the heart, not just as each of us as individuals, but heavy on our heart as a nation. Indeed, the sorrow that extends from this reaches beyond boundaries of nations, and the sadness hangs heavy everywhere. Now, I think that our gospel will help us to begin to address this, and I think we have to look at these things in sequence. And so if you'll allow me, I'm going to back up and talk a little bit about the pilgrimage before we get into the heavy matter at hand. Now, the pilgrimage is a thing that our youth and our youth leaders had been preparing for well more than a year, but really deliberately over the last year preparing. And so 11 youth, 4 adults, and me. I get my own category because I'm telling the story. 11 youth, 4 adults, and me. Actually, the adults that went would probably testify to you that I probably fit my own category as well. Somewhere between youth and adult, went to Italy, and we had an amazing time. We had a great plan, and mostly it worked. You know, like any trip when you're traveling with 16 people, there are little hiccups along the way, like, well, we have most of your reservation, but not all of your reservation, which, even if you don't understand Italian, still comes through. But all the obstacles seemed to melt away, and we worked through them rather well. I would say, I think we all learned and gained from the experience. The sites that we observed, I mean, we'd barely hit the ground in Italy, and we were already at the Colosseum and the Forum. We spent most of a day in the Vatican, which I think an apt description is something like a very holy, sacred circus, really. I mean, just the sheer number of people there on any given day. You know, you'd think the Sistine Chapel would be majestic, and it is, and yet the crowds pressing in around you and through that space, combined with people saying, "Silence, silence," because they're trying to maintain some sense of sacred and holy in there, is all very jarring until you kind of find a spot where you can stand still enough to maybe connect with the sacred of the place. So, you know, sometimes we think that's just a thing of here, you know, trying to find a stillness or some place where we can be still enough to connect with God, but it exists even in these sacred spots as well. I will say that as we've ventured a little further out into the hill country and towards Assisi, we did find, I think, a little bit more stillness. Now, we'd rented a spot to stay where we could all stay in one spot, and I really felt like something wonderful happened as we entered that space. Now, it was described as a condo, although you can just displace any American notion of what a condo is. The building was 1,000 years old. We were glad it had plumbing. I mean, that's maybe not as glad to share the plumbing with as many as we did, but glad it had plumbing. And I think really it doesn't matter so much that we were in Italy at that point, although it was helpful to have the sacred sites and the destinations and observe a different people and culture than what we're accustomed to. It breaks things loose for us in a way. But I think the real blessing for us in the pilgrimage was the sense of community that's established as we live together, as we offer prayers daily, as we go to bed and rise each morning together. We cook meals and walk literally and figuratively through life together for that many days in a row. Something happens and relationships begin to blossom in ways they didn't before. And I think the real blessing out of a pilgrimage is the sense of community that's formed among the youth and the adults that went. And I think that's what we carry back with us as much as information or having visited sacred sites, which were great. But I think it's that sense of community that connects us both with what happened there, what will happen here, and the gospel message. And so that's what I bring back is the joy that we found in community. Now, joy, yes, but community does bring challenges too, doesn't it? I mean, whether we're talking about even the simple community of a family or a household provides challenges, how we live with one another, the division of household tasks, and you know, that's kind of a perpetual and maybe perplexing give and take in a relationship because it's always changing. And I think the same is true as we form church community or as we form community as a city or as a nation. And I think this is where it's interesting because the gospel does transcend all of these boundaries. And we see that even in the gospel this morning because Jesus is traveling from Galilee. He's traveling from places that had the same notion of God, places that were primarily Jewish in their understanding of or living out of their faith. And it says he moves opposite. And it really is a sense of moving away and even an opposite culture and place as he arrives to the Gerasenes. It's a very different culture. It's just across the lake, and yet it is so very different. It could be known as different immediately. They had swine, they had pigs, and that would not have made much sense in the Jewish culture where it was a dirty animal. It wouldn't have been very practical to be raising pigs across the Galilee where they wouldn't have had the same uses. And as he arrives, there's a man there, probably barely recognizable as a man. A man who clearly neglected by his society. One left without clothing. Left to sleep in tombs. Their solution at times was to try to chain him down so that he wouldn't probably disrupt their way of being and their life and the general peace of the community established. But he breaks free and continues to move further away, and the society probably just wants to be done with him. It's almost painful to consider what this must have been like. And it's probably painful for Jesus to be confronted with this, and the community must experience some amount of shame as they consider the neglect of this person, because he's still a person. And the demons within him beg Jesus not to destroy them. Now, the scholars are somewhat divided as to why Jesus allows the demons into the pigs that then destroys a living being, but perhaps it's the only way for them to really get a hold of the attention of the community that's neglected this soul. Because when the demons are cast into the pigs and the pigs run off the edge of the cliff into the abyss and drowned, then the community takes notice and they rush out to meet Jesus and confront the situation that arises to them. But when they get there, they see the man they've neglected sitting calmly, clothed and attentive to Jesus. And they're scared. They're scared, frankly, by the love and compassion Jesus has shown him. I suspect while they had tried to chain him, they probably didn't confront this sordid fellow with love. And perhaps Jesus' love, the love of God, scares us too. And maybe it ought to. The love of Jesus is powerful. The love of Jesus overtakes demons. Now, we don't deal much with the demonic these days. I think we have a different sense of things. It's not to say that the demonic doesn't exist. In fact, I would suggest to you that as the world has developed and as first world nations have learned to deal with the problems of humanity, of shelter and food and health care, we've become less and less reliant upon God and more self-reliant. And in some ways, this is a good thing that we have used the gifts that God has given us to further expand what is possible, but at the same time, we have lost something wonderful when we've given up our reliance on God. And while we might not confront the demonic on a regular basis, I think it's helpful to consider what it is that we find bad and evil in the world around us. Now, while I was in seminary, there was presented to me a theology known as chaos theology. Now, I liked it just because of the name at first, because, what's not to like about a theology known as chaos theology? And I really actually found it quite compelling, but the crux of it, if I might, the summation of it is that most of what we find bad or evil in the world around us, most of what we confront as not good, is actually born up out of the absence of God more than it is an evil force. So often, the things that are bad or evil come from the absence of God, particularly the absence of God in our decision making, than they are an actual evil force working against us. Because remember, God created the world, and as you read through the story of creation, God pauses perpetually to acknowledge that what has been created is good. And yet, we know that there is bad around us. Evil seeps in. Each of us daily make decisions. Many of them don't have an impact far beyond us, but some of them do. Even how we interact with one another has an impact. The decisions about how we make our interactions with the people in our lives, even as we drive, and it seems relatively autonomous as we're shielded by great glass and steel, still the decisions we make behind the wheel or in line in a store have an impact on the community and the people around us. Even when we don't exchange words, our actions leave an impression and an impact on the world around us. And when we're confronted, like we are this week, with events as tragic as we've seen happen in Orlando, I think we need to reflect on what our part in responding to it is. This is not the first shooting that we've experienced as a nation. No matter what your position on gun control, no matter what your position on sexuality, no matter what your political stance, we do well to acknowledge first that this is a tragic loss of human life. Now, roughly a year ago, I stood before you. We discussed the events of a shooting in a church in South Carolina, and we named it very well. We talked about how racism still exists in the world. And I think this event, we can label it a lot of things, but it's deep hatred that is infectious. Deep hatred that caused the events in Orlando. hatred that's probably been born up out of solitude and removal of oneself from society and allowing others to influence our actions. You know, when we remove ourselves, we shield ourselves from the input in the community around us. And I think it is our responsibility to make sure that we are reaching out to those who are hurting, reaching out to those in need, and not allowing those we know about to remove themselves from society and brood up this amount of hatred, because it will spill over. And we all suffer. And the shame and the agony of this hatred hangs with us, and it will for a time. And as we mourn the loss of human life, and as we mourn the tragedy that rests upon us, I hope that we respond with God's love. Because remember, as we read the gospel this morning, even Jesus responds to even the most outrageous of circumstances with compassion and love. And he asks that we might be known by our love. And it's through the power of God's love that we are capable of transforming the world around us, transforming communities, and transforming lives. If we respond out of love, it will change the world. The people, when they saw the man transformed, were frightened. The man was transformed. He was ready to do anything for Jesus. Now, it's funny to me because if we read through the chapter 8, Jesus actually performs a series of miracles. Chapter 8 of Luke, Jesus, and they're all somewhat different circumstances. And what happens is it demonstrates God's power and authority flowing through Jesus in a variety of different ways. But more often than not, you'll probably notice that when Jesus performs miracles, people get very excited and they want to do something. And more often than not, Jesus tells them, shh, not yet. But in this case, Jesus sets the man free back into his own community because that's where his message will be most compelling. They have witnessed what he was. They had tried to chain him down. He had continually broken free from that, and now he was free in a new kind of way because he was free from the demons that had possessed him, and he was filled with the love of God, and he was ready to share it with anybody who would listen. May we be filled with God's love. May it overwhelm us. May it transform us. May the world witness the transformation within our own souls, made powerful, known to us through the love of Christ, welling up within us. Let it spill forth as we're united in God's Spirit, and flow through the streets of our communities so that those who might be brooding hatred might be squelched. Those who are unsure of God's love for them might know that it is real, that it is tangible, and that they too can be transformed by it. May they experience that love through us. May they experience that love through our prayers. May they experience that love through our worship. May they experience that love through our outreach to them. May they experience that love in our interactions each and every moment of each and every day, that we might be known by our love.